Hello, Mr. Thomas. Our organization would be interested in hiring you to create a graphics package for our upcoming sermon series in the book of Ephesians.
I mean, come on, is anybody surprised that I said yes? I mean, come on, you all know that I'm playing this for laughs. When Caleb reached out to me about the sermon series, of course I said yes. Rock Point is still my home church, even though I no longer work at the church. I was super excited to get on this project, and it's been really fun for this summer to be able to see even how it's been implemented from a different perspective, rather than being on staff, but being in the seats with everybody else. Today, I'm going to take you through the process of how we came up with the idea for the series and how I designed it and put together everything else that goes around a sermon series so you can get an idea of what it takes actually from a designer's perspective and from the thinking perspective, what goes into a sermon graphics package for a church and why is it important. I hope that you guys enjoy. Now, at the beginning of every project, the first thing I want to do is get as much information from the client as I can. And the great part about this being my home church is that means I got to get coffee with my best friends to begin working on a project. So fun. Caleb's one of my best friends. It's actually really funny that he reached out over an email to start the process. That was just him being goofy. I love the guy. Just so silly. So the purpose of a meeting like this is to develop a project brief that acts as the guide for me as the designer to accomplish making what the client needs. That includes the ideas and creative vibe, but also a clear deliverables list so we're both on the same page of what the client is getting on the other end, as well as when they are getting it. Clear communication is extremely important. We also worked out what the script would be since there was going to be a video involved, and the script was just going to be Ephesians 4, just a portion of the text. Really simple. So I took the brief that Caleb and I built and sat down to work. So every project that I do begins with a mood board of some kind, whether it's in Notion or Milanote. Milanote usually works better for clients because it's so visual. I get ideas together, I put the brief together so that I know what I'm going to be working on throughout the entirety of the project. For this project, I also hopped over into one of my favorite apps called Coolers to start getting an idea of colors for the project because we knew we wanted to be beachy, fun, summery, and Coolers lets you develop color palettes really quickly. Then I looked for ideas on Pinterest and hopped over into Midjourney because I knew that what I was going to be looking for I couldn't find as a stock image. And Caleb and I talked about doing AI generation to find the right idea for the hero graphic of this series. And I started working on prompts, and actually the first prompt gave me the clearest idea for the direction that we would go for this series. I loved this idea of a Hawaiian shirt in a beachfront store. Now, when I do AI generation for a project, I like to generate a lot of images. In photography, we have this saying, you take 100 to get 10. It's this idea that the more quantity of raw that you work with, the more likely you're actually to get something that's not just good, but great. When you have 100 options and you can filter it down to the 10 best, that's a great position to be in. And I've actually brought that from the photography world into AI generation world. I worked with a couple of different ideas. Now, all of the ideas that I had, I'm actually doing wider than what the screens at Rock Point were going to be, because I wanted to be able to move on either side. That's something that I learned before this project. I needed to be able to fill the screen, and I wanted more to be able to fill the screen with than less. So I came up with a couple different ideas, and I really liked the different color palettes here in these. I sent them off to Caleb to kind of see what he was thinking, but I just kept working through iteration after iteration of these images so that we would find the right look as soon as possible. And then we had it. So at this point, I knew this was the image I wanted to start moving forward with. And I had this idea of doing kind of like a hand-drawn element to the graphics. So I actually really quickly just wrote it out in Milanote. Now, this is not what this app is made for. And of course, this looks terrible. But once I had the idea, I wanted to get it out as fast as I could so that I could make sure that this was worth moving forward on. And pretty quickly I realized it was. So I actually brought it into Procreate on my iPad. Here what you're looking at is I started to make a couple of guides for myself. The deal is I am not a great hand-drawn artist. That's actually why I use AI image generation in the first place, is because often when a client needs an illustration, I'm not very good at that. I'm getting better. I like to push myself and to grow in a lot of different ways. And I even saw this project as an opportunity for me to push myself and try to grow in a new way. And I think I got there. Now, I'm going to go ahead and cue you into where this is going to go. We're not actually going to use what I spent a very long time on my iPad drawing out as the final. But it generated another idea that allowed me to, in the end, create what would be what I call the hero graphic for a series. Now, the hero graphic, its primary purpose is to communicate the message as visually as possible. This is something that's a little bit different about how the church does visuals and marketing and art and culture. The point of it in the church world is not that the art is great art by itself. It's that it's communicating a message. And so every decision that I make when it comes to a graphic for a church as opposed to a business is primarily selling services or products. And so they're trying to drive a call to action that someone should buy the product or use the service. In the church, we're trying to share a message as clearly as possible. There's a saying that we've been talking a lot in the church world around about this idea of like the gospel being a prism, that every moment that you turn the prism, you see it from a different angle. And that's often what we're doing in the Christian life as we're reading the word together, preaching the word together, singing the word together. And so one of the things that I think about when it comes to making art for the church, especially for a sermon series, I'm thinking constantly, is this communicating the message visually? Are people going to get the right idea when they see this? Are they looking at the prism and seeing how good the gospel is through this? Now, that can be done in a lot of different ways. Of course, the primary outlet for sharing the gospel on a Sunday morning is going to come from people. It's going to come from the pastor preaching. It's going to come from worship leaders singing, along with the congregation, praying, reading the word itself. But I am a firm believer that the space that you are in helps to form you as a believer. When it comes to the word, as we present the word, we want to present it with clarity, but we also want to present it in its compelling nature, because the gospel by its very nature is compelling. So when the space around you isn't compelling in the same way, it might actually be working against your vocal presentation of the gospel. This is something that I've been talking about with some pastor friends of mine and starting to flesh out. We could be in an empty box and that actually have a formative effect on us as Christians, even if the gospel is being presented really clearly by a preacher, by a worship team. And I'm really curious to keep studying over the next few years. How much does it affect us? I'm not talking about experience for experience's sake. I'm talking about understanding how everything around us forms us in one way or another. And so I want to add tools that are going to positively form us for the sake of the gospel. So at this point, I exported my drawings and brought them into Photoshop with the original image once it was upscaled by Midjourney AI. And I started to get to work making sure that the first version of this hero graphic, this title graphic, whatever you want to call it, wanted to make sure that it was ready to go to send to Caleb so that I can get feedback. Because at this point, everything that I'm going to be working on for the sermon series after this is going to be directly derivative of what is going on in the hero graphic. It's like the logo. It's like the brand. It's what establishes everything visual moving forward when it comes to this package. So once I felt like I had the right idea, I exported out of Photoshop and put it in a message to Caleb. Now, obviously, that's pretty informal. I'm going to do a bigger presentation of the whole first version, but I needed to get some first impressions from Caleb before it went on to the pastor team and the other decision makers. And here's what he said. Dude, sweet. Yeah, I think that's not too far off. First impressions, I think either the busyness of the shirt or the background needs to be dialed back. When they both have a lot going on, it doesn't pop the way it should. Also, personally, I like the text, but it won't sell. But the shirt and tag and title seem like a great direction. Cool stuff, dude. And of course, I'm sitting there like, what do you mean it won't sell? And he replied, like with Brian, I think he'd say it was too stylized. Now, having known these guys for as long as I have, and knowing the way that things work when it comes to decision making at a church, I've got two options here. I can either try another idea, or if I really believe that this is an idea that can work, I can kind of push it through. Now with Caleb and Brian, I know I can try to push something through at first, fully prepared that if on the other side it doesn't work, of course I'm going to go back to the drawing board. This is not for me specifically, as in like, this isn't a project where I have to be the one who's completely satisfied with it. I have to communicate their message visually. Now, in this case, this was a situation where I said, I think that we can get this one through, and I think it's going to really work as a really refreshing way to revamp the look that Rockpoint has had this year after the previous series that we were just a part of. And Caleb agreed. He was on board. So I made some more adjustments, and we went through with it. Now, I guess I should say, we didn't go through with exactly that image. As I already mentioned earlier, I ended up not going with my specific hand-drawn work that I did because it inspired a better idea, because I did think through what is going to work the best, and I ended up deciding that working with a pre-existing font might actually bring the kind of clarity that we needed to get this project over the line, because I love the idea as a whole, and I didn't want to hold on to any kind of pride on my part of it has to be my handwork. That's not what I was looking for. So almost as a palette cleanser, I threw in the font that I was using for the Ephesians on the tag of the shirt and started to see, is that a better direction to go? Is that going to sell better or not? But I really did believe in the highly stylized look that I had before. So I ended up prepping the image, making sure that it was ready to go. And then I went to one of my favorite font sites called Fontesque, and I looked for a bubbly font that looked like the idea that I was going with my handwriting to see if it would work. And honestly, it worked really well. It had a little bit more clarity to it. It was a little easier to manipulate, so I could get it done in the amount of time that I had to work on this. And it really it worked. It ended up being the vibe of the series. And often this is what it's like to be a graphic designer working for clients, is you're the one who, as a designer, has experience, has a specific eye for this, but if you're not thinking about what's going to be best for the client, you're not going to get projects across the line, you're not going to get callbacks. Oftentimes, what I've found gets you the callbacks is when you make things as clear as possible, not as artsy as possible. Now, this is very stylized, especially given what we've usually worked with at Rockpoint, which is a Midwestern church through and through, largely blue-collar area. People really want meat and potatoes with a word. They're not being driven by creative culture. They're being driven by word culture, which is so cool. It's such a great church to be a part of. And it's still our home church, and we love it very much. But I had a feeling that this would be a very refreshing and fun way to do a sermon series. So I exported these versions and started to build my presentation for it to actually go to the pastoral team so that they can get an idea for what Caleb and I were working on, and they could give their feedback, because they're the decision makers, and ultimately they're the ones who are preaching the messages that are going to be showcased through these visuals as they're preaching. And so absolutely they need to have a say. They need to be really comfortable. They need to know that we've got their back as creative support for what they're doing with the word. So I went back into Midjourney and created a whole bunch of other images that were not actually images for the graphics package, but ended up being images for the presentation. It's kind of give the feel as a whole. I've found that if you go really hard on presenting ideas to clients, the effort that you put into presenting it often shows how serious you are about an idea, and that kind of communicates a confidence that makes it easier for decision makers to sign off on what you're trying to accomplish. So for the presentation, I included what this series could look like as lower thirds for broadcast, so that it is all very cohesive from the in-person experience to the online experience. Rockpoint has a be found strategy in their live stream. Most people often look at a church's live stream to decide if they want to make a decision to go there physically, and it's a value at Rockpoint to gather physically, so we put effort into the live stream so that people see how good it is to be at the church and want to be a part of the church. Now, in the presentation, I also included some of the legwork that Caleb and I did in our initial meeting so that everybody was on the same page about where I was coming from in presenting this idea. So I actually put in a lot of the descriptive words that Caleb and I came up with, a lot of the guidelines that we worked with from the beginning, and just wanted to make it as clear as possible where all these ideas were coming from so that they could connect it to what they're thinking about with this series. Then I packaged it all up and emailed it off to Caleb to send to his team, and then I waited.
Several days later.
They really liked it, actually. They had a couple of bits of feedback, primarily for clarity, exactly what I expected. And so I got to working on everything else that goes into a sermon graphics package, because it's not just about the main graphic. especially at Rock Point, actually one of the main things that's on our screens when the pastor is preaching is actually the scriptures itself on an iPad that the pastors use. And they get to write notes on it. They show us how they study the Bible. It's actually been one of the most encouraging things that we've introduced to our church in years, because I've heard so many people talk about how encouraged they were to see how our pastors read and study the Bible, and that it's actually affected how they read and study the Bible, which is so cool. I love when technology and creativity get to support the word in that kind of way, where we're hearing tangible differences in people's lives because of the things that we do. So it's something that we've invested a lot of time in and learned how to do really well. And what you're actually seeing is the way that we do it. Our pastors are actually able to put their own text in on these slides through a program called Figma, which is just a presentation program that I like to use, primarily because that's how we actually create the scrolling effect. It's just a super long document that they're scrolling on an iPad. But the great part is that I can build the templates for them, and they can do the work week to week. They don't have to wait on a designer to make their slides for them. They can do it on their own time, so they're not pressured. And because every pastor who preaches at our church has a different schedule and a different flow for how they prepare for messages. But then I also needed to export things like the final color palette. Now, Coolers is really cool for this because you can actually import an image and pull colors directly from it to build a palette. So that's what I did. I pulled in the image that I produced in Midjourney, the upscaled one that was the basis of the hero graphic, brought it into Coolers, selected the colors that I wanted to be a part of the template, and then I could export it as both a PDF or a PNG so that anybody at the team at Rock Point could have the exact colors that I was working with in the image when they're working in ProPresenter or making a social media graphic. Whatever they would need, they'd be able to have it. That's kind of the focus of what I'm trying to do with these graphics packages, is give churches as many tools as they can so that they have to do less work on their end to actually communicate their message. So once everything was built out for this graphics package, I uploaded it to Google Drive because that's the way that Rockpoint uses cloud storage. And then I got to check everything off of my list, make sure that all the deliverables were good to go. But unfortunately, I forgot to record when I was working on the bumper video. So we'll have to go through that at another time. But here's all the graphics for the series. And here's the bumper video. Man, I love my home church. This is super cool to be a part of. It was really fun and really humbling to get to work on a series now that I'm not on staff at Rock Point, but actually get to do it through my agency that I'm building out of the hope and the prayer that I get to help make kingdom impact with churches by resourcing them. It's super special to me. This was a super fun project. I love getting to design sermon series for churches. I think it's one of the coolest ways to use art to help influence people as we are all preaching about the same things. We're all talking about the same word, the same gospel, but we get to look at it in so many different ways. And my prayer is that the art that I get to make helps encourage people to see the goodness of God. I hope that it adds clarity as pastors are preaching. I hope that it's compelling in a way that just makes the gospel seem so beautiful and sweet. It's something I've gotten to do for a very long time now. I've gotten to do well over 50 series for more than 20 churches at this point over the past 8 years. It's something that's super special to me. I love it. I'm sorry that I didn't record working on the bumper video. I really wasn't trying to give you some kind of tease to get you to go watch another video, but if you want to see my process, I'm happy to share it. I'll do that in a future video with a future project. Let me know in the comments below if you want to see that. But for now, like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.